Hey, welcome back. This is going to be part 2 of lesson 3, and in this part we're going to talk mainly about methods. What is a method? Methods are blocks of code or statements that are executed when called or when they're told to run from within your program. They can sometimes return values or data to you, and sometimes they won't. Now, all methods, for them to work properly, must follow a blueprint or a type of signature. At a minimum, methods must have at least four items. They must have a return type. They must have a name, a parameter list, and a body. Now, when it comes to the parameter list, a method doesn't require parameters, but it does require the opening and closing parentheses where the parameters would go. So it doesn't, I know it says 4 there, but it's kind of a gray area. One thing too you got to keep in mind is the method name and the function name shouldn't be used interchangeably. And I know for a fact that sometimes I have said method and sometimes I've said function. The reason that is because in C# it doesn't really matter much because there aren't methods and functions. They're pretty much one and the same. But in other languages like Visual Basic, for example, a method or procedure is what they're called, and a function are two different things. In VB, methods don't have a return value, and functions do have a return value. Well, in C#, we determine if a method is going to have a return value or not. So that's why sometimes I'll use them interchangeably, and really you shouldn't. They're really called methods. So we should, if I do use them interchangeably, I do apologize for that. So let's go ahead and take a look at a method in its different parts. We will look at the main method in a new project that we create. Then we'll go ahead and create our own method and call that method from within the main method. Alright, now that we got our new project created here, I just labeled my project methods, and the solution name is Learning C# Methods here. So let's go ahead and take a look at the actual main method here and and break down the different parts of it. Like I said, there are 4 parts. In this particular method here, the main method of a program has one extra part, and that is that static keyword, and we'll come back to that there in just a second. Alright, the first part that we talked about was the return type. In this case here, it's return type of void. Void means I'm not going to return anything to you. Now the main method, in any program you write within the C# language, and I believe some other languages too, can only have one of 2 return types, one being void and one being integer. But when you write your methods, they can return any type of data that they want, as long as that type is valid. So it could return a string, it could return a boolean, it could return an array list, it could return it could return another class. If you created a class called cars, it could return a class of cars. It could do all sorts of stuff like that. The method name is next here, and this one here is main. That can't change with the main method. It has to be called main. But you can name your methods anything you want, just like you can with a variable. You want to give your method names some meaning so you kind of have an idea of what they're doing. You don't want to name a method that calculates tax. You don't want to call get barrels of water. That would just be ridiculous. So you want to give it some type of meaning. And the third part here is the parameter list. Now, like we said, the parameter list isn't required, but the opening and closing parentheses are. A parameter list here that we have is a string array, and that's the type right here. It's an array of type string, and it's the parameter name is called args, or short for arguments. The fourth part is the body. The body we've seen before, just like in if statements, has the opening and closing curly braces there. Pretty much the body of anything in C# is going to have the opening and closing curly braces. And that just lets us know that this code here belongs to this particular statement or method or if statement or what have you. Alright, now the next part we're going to talk about is that static keyword. Static is required on the main method, and what static does is when the program loads, it automatically loads the main method into memory. So it can be called immediately, since the main method in any program is the entry point into your program. The special thing about static is that if you have to call other methods or other things from within that method itself, they also have to be static. If they're not static, you'll get an error. The IDE will give you an error saying, "Hey, I can't access that," or "I don't know what you're talking about," or you have to create an instance of the particular class in order to get access to that method. And we'll get into that in later lessons when we talk more about classes. So now let's go ahead and let's create a method of our own here. And let's go ahead and start out with the word static, since it has to be static so we can get access to it. And we're not going to return anything, so we'll go ahead and do void. And we'll just title it my method. And we're not going to have it accept any parameters, so we'll just do the opening and closing parenthesis. Then we'll make the body with the opening and closing curly braces. And in here, simply what we'll do is we'll just output some text to the screen. So we'll do the console.writeLine, and we'll just put, this is text from my method. Okay, straightforward, pretty simple there. Now we need to call that. How do we call methods? Well, you call methods basically as they look. You can actually take this here and you can copy and paste that. The only thing you'll need is a semicolon. So you call them basically how they look, whatever name they are. And you have the opening and closing parenthesis. If it accepted parameters, we would have something in there, but it doesn't. And then the semicolon just to end the line there. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. Oh, first of all, we're going to have to pause the screen. So in this particular case here, we could put the that console.readline in one of two different locations. We could put it after the my method is called, or you could put it after this line here. In any case, it'll still be hit, and I'll show you. We can step through our program as it's running, and I'll show you what I'm talking about there. So let's go ahead and run this right now and see what we get. We should get the output as desired. This is text from my method, as we do. Go ahead and press enter and end the program. Now let's go ahead and I'm going to show you another feature of the IDE here, and it's a way to step through your program for debugging purposes. On the left-hand side here, you'll have a thin gray bar, and you can left-click in there, and you can put a red dot. The red dot there is called a breakpoint. And what happens is, as the code is being executed, when it hits a breakpoint, it'll pause execution and it'll come back into the actual code. So then from there, we can actually step through the program line by line to see what's going on. So let's go ahead and press F5. And immediately the screen flashes and comes right back in, because this is pretty much the first line of our program. And now we're sitting here and it's waiting for us to do something. And how we step through it is by pressing F11. If we press F11 once, it'll go to the next line. This line is the line that's going to be called. This isn't the line that's called, it's going to be called. So if we press F11 again, our cursor should come down to this curly brace right there. And now we're into that line there. We'll do F11 again. Now F11. Now we'll call that line there. Now the console hasn't come up for us yet, because the code's still executing. It's not waiting for us to do anything. But we can pull the console up, and the text is there, but the program hasn't hit the console.readline yet, so it's not waiting for us. Let's continue to step through that. And once it gets to the console.readline, now it'll come up. Now the program is waiting for us. It's no longer in the code, so we can step through it. It needs something from us first. So as soon as we press enter, it'll go back into the code, and now we can continue to step through it. And then once it ends there, the program terminates, and now we're done with the debugging session there. Alright, now let's go ahead and let's change up our method a little bit here, and let's have it return some type of value for us. Let's have it return a string, so then we can use the console.readline and have that call our method here. So to do that, we'll just type out the word string, and that will now be our return type. And immediately our method name there gets underlined, and it says not all code paths return a value. That's because we haven't really done anything like that. We haven't returned anything yet. So let's go ahead and delete this line here. And in order to return a particular value, you do just that. You type out the keyword return, and then since we're going to do return a string, we're going to need the double quotes and the semicolon, and then the particular string inside the double quotes that we're going to return. And we'll just return what we had there before. This is text from my method. And now, when this gets called, if we just left it as is right now and ran our program, we won't get anything on the screen because we haven't told the program yet to do anything with that value that's being returned. So what we can do here is we know that the console.writeLine method takes a string in order for it to output that text to the actual screen right here. And the string is the actual parameter that the WriteLine wants. So what we can do, we know that our method here returns a type string, so we can call our method, we can pass our method into the WriteLine as a parameter, just as we did before. And the only thing different is you don't put the semicolon after the my method opening and closing parentheses. You put it at the end of the line just as you normally would to signal this is the end of the line. So now if we call this, we'll get that text back. And again, we can step through that to see how that's actually done. And we'll go ahead and do F5, and we'll F11. Now we're going to call the console.WriteLine, which in turn is going to call our method. It's going to get the string here. Now it's going to return it back to the WriteLine method. And now that text will be in the console, as we see there. Still we're not to the read line yet, so it's still waiting on us. We'll do F11 again. Now it's waiting on us. So now we'll go ahead and press enter, and we'll get back to the code, do F11, and the program terminates and finishes. So as you can see, even though the WriteLine method here needs a string as a parameter, our method is a string because it's giving a string back. Hopefully that makes sense to you. The next thing we'll do here now is we'll change our method one more time, and we'll make it accept a parameter. And let's have it accept a string. Actually, no, let's have it accept an integer. So in order to do that, we'll just type out the word int. We'll put a space. So now int is our type. Now we need to give it a name. We'll just call it myInt. And then now what we can do is we can do an if statement in here. We'll do something like if myInt is equal to, let's say, the value of 10, then return that code right there. Now, even though we have a return here, our method still has some type of error to it, and it's going to be not all code paths return a value. And basically why it's doing that is because if the myInt value isn't 10, this won't get executed, so what's going to be returned? Something still needs to be returned. We could do an else here and return some default text, or you could completely be outside the if statement and do a return of some type of string saying the value wasn't 10. Just like that. And now that'll satisfy the requirements for our method here. And we still have a little bit of an error going on up here, and that's because it's saying no overload for method that takes 0 arguments. What does that mean? Well, our method now takes a parameter. They call them arguments. Parameter and arguments can be used interchangeably, and that's fine. So we need to put something within our opening and closing parentheses here, a number, because we know we accept an integer. So let's go ahead and let's just put in 10, and that'll satisfy those requirements, and the error message will go away. So now we'll go ahead and press F5 to execute it, and we get this is text from my method because we passed in 10. And if my int was 10, let's go ahead and return that text there. Now we'll go ahead and we'll pass in 0, and we'll get the value wasn't 10. Basically, we know how if statements work there. So what you can do, we'll go back to the debugging thing here, and you can actually see values within your code as the program is running as well. So let's go ahead and put the breakpoint there, and do F5, and let's start stepping through it. Once that method has been called, this parameter has already been passed to this particular method here. If you mouse over your parameter, it'll give you the value right here. We know what the value is. So like, say that you're in a bigger program and you want to know what value's coming into that, and you can do this stepper method here, and you can find out what's actually going on. Get into the nuts and bolts of your program to see what's happening. So let's go ahead and finish the code there, and press enter. And come back and do F11. Okay, so that's a basic rundown of methods using return types and parameters there. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, now I know that my method requires an integer because I can see it right here. Well, what if I can't see that method? How do I know what it's going to accept? Well, you've kind of seen me do it a little bit. Let's use the WriteLine method, for example, because we can't see that one. We'll do console.WriteLine, and we'll do the opening parenthesis. Now this little box comes up here, and it's part of the IntelliSense, or part of the help that the environment gives us access to. And we see the 1 of 19. What that means there is there are 19 different versions of the WriteLine method, and you can use the down arrow to go through all of them. Okay, we see one of the WriteLines accepts a Boolean value. One of them accepts a character value. One accepts a character array. Another one decimal. So this is how you can see what parameters need to be passed into some methods if you can't see them visually with your own eyes. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that here for our method here. Let's go ahead and create another method of the same type name, we'll do static string my method, and let's have it accept a different type of value this time. Let's have it accept a Boolean. Call it my bool, and this case here, let's just have it return a straight string. We won't do any logic in it. This is text from the method that accepts a Boolean. Okay. And now if we come back up to our console.WriteLine and we type out my method, do the opening parenthesis, now we have the one of two. We have the one that has the bool, and we have the one that has the int. So let's just go ahead and pass in true. And let's get rid of the breakpoint here and do F5. Now we get this is text from the method that accepts a Boolean. So to have different versions of the method, you title it the same, you have the return type the same, but you change the different parameters, and that'll make different versions. So you may have you may run into instances like that. Just like, for example, the WriteLine, it has 19 different versions of it to accept different values. Okay, another thing we're going to talk about here is you may have seen that when you do this and you're stepping through these different versions of the method, they have some help here, and you might be wondering, well, how do we do that? How do we get that help there? Well, let's take a look how we do that. If you put your cursor above any one of your methods and you do 3 forward slashes in a row, 1, 2, 3, it brings up it automatically brings up this code comment section here. And here you have a summary. This is my method that accepts a bool value. Then you have the parameter name, and then you have what's its return type. The return type is a string, And for the parameter name here, we could put any Boolean you want. So we can come back up here. We'll do the console.writeLine. Oops, my method. And now we can see that the first method that we have here, this is my method that accepts a bool value, and that comes from the summary. And then we have the parameter name, which is my bool, any Boolean value. And return type is string. So that's another way to comment your methods. So another developer that needs to use your methods can see some type of documentation about it if he can't visually see it with his eyes. Alright, so the next thing we're going to talk about here is we're going to take a look at some of the other stuff that's in our code file. Let's go ahead and create a new project. Take a look at some of those other lines of code that you have seen that we haven't talked about yet. So let's go back to our environment here. I created a new project just called Breaking Down the Program. First thing we're going to start with is at the top here we have these using statements, or they're called using directives, and they're not required. You don't need to have these in here for your particular program to run at all. What they do is they help reduce typing, and they load different assemblies. I don't want to really say assemblies. They load different sections of code for you. So, like for example, the system here, the system namespace. If since we have that in there, we can just type in console.writeLine like we have been doing before. But if we took that out, if we remove the whole system directive, we wouldn't be able to just go console now, since the system part's missing. So then we'd actually literally have to type out system.console.writeLine in order to get access to that. So it loads different namespaces and different collections of code for us, just to help us reduce typing and things like that. But like I said, they're not required, and they just they do help you out. And in some instances where you create other projects within a project and you want to include that project into another project, you would have to use a using statement like that, or using directive like that, or you just have to type it out. Next thing we're going to talk about is the namespace. Really, the namespace is the main container for your entire project. So if we take a look at system.console.writeLine. Okay. System would be the namespace. Console would be the class, and then the WriteLine would be a method. So we could actually take ours. If we type out breaking down the program, that would be the namespace. Then we have program, which would be the class, and then we'd have main, which would be the method. So that's kind of a hierarchy of how the namespace, classes, and things work. So when you're doing the system.console.writeLine, you kind of have an idea of what's actually going on there. The next thing here, the class. The class will be a single container, I guess you'd say, for all your particular code to go in. So like all your methods will go within the class. Your properties, any type of code that you want to put in has to be within the actual class. And then within the class, that's where like I said, it's where your actual code files go and whatnot. So that's in a nutshell pretty much when you start a new project of what all that stuff is, what it means. And as we go through the more lessons here, we'll see using directives a little more. We'll get more into what the namespaces are, and we'll create more classes, and we'll probably have 2 or more classes within the namespace or within the same code file. We can do that. There's a whole different array of things that we can do, rather than just having one class and a couple methods and this and that. So let's go back to our slide here and take a look to see what's to come for lesson 4. Alright, so in lesson 4 we're going to talk about looping controls. The 4 different types of loops that we're going to talk about are the do loop, the while loop, the for each loop, and the for loop. So I appreciate you for watching. Hope to see you in lesson 4.